The keys didn't work. I stood there in my hospital discharge clothes, fumbling with the lock on my own front door, wondering if the pain medication was making me hallucinate. 3 weeks in the hospital after emergency surgery, and somehow my house key wouldn't turn in my own lock. That's when I heard the laughter coming from inside. Female voices. One of them was my sister Maya. My name is Jessica Chen, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I had my life figured out. I'm 32, a freelance graphic designer who'd finally saved enough to buy my own house in Portland. Not a mansion, just a cozy 3-bedroom craftsman, with original hardwood floors and a kitchen I'd spent months renovating. It was mine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The first thing that had ever truly belonged to me after years of apartments and roommates and making do. The surgery wasn't planned. Nobody plans to have their appendix nearly rupture during what should have been a routine checkup. One minute I was sitting in Dr. Rodriguez's office discussing my annual physical results. The next I was being rushed into emergency surgery with a severe case of appendicitis that had apparently been building for weeks. The pain I'd been dismissing as work stress had actually been my body trying to tell me something was seriously wrong. I remember texting Maya from the ambulance, my fingers shaking as I typed out the message. Emergency surgery, Appendix, Sacred Heart Hospital, please water my plants. Simple, straightforward, the kind of message you send when you're scared, but trying not to panic your little sister. Maya had always been the dramatic one in our family, prone to overreacting to every minor crisis. The last thing I wanted was her showing up at the hospital in hysterics. What I didn't expect was radio silence, no response to my text, no phone call, no worried sister bursting through the hospital doors, demanding to know if I was okay. For 3 weeks, as I fought through complications from the surgery, developed an infection, and slowly recovered in a sterile hospital room, Maya was nowhere to be found. The nurses kept asking about family, about emergency contacts, about who would be picking me up when I was discharged. I kept making excuses for her, explaining that she was probably busy with work, that she'd show up eventually. Maya worked as a marketing coordinator for a tech startup downtown, one of those companies with ping-pong tables and kombucha on tap, that made her feel like she was living in an episode of a Silicon Valley comedy. She loved the lifestyle, the networking events, the feeling of being part of something cutting-edge and important. At 28, she was 4 years younger than me, but had always acted like she was the older, wiser sister. She had opinions about everything, especially my life choices. When I'd bought the house 6 months earlier, Maya had been skeptical. "Are you sure you can afford this, Jess?" she'd ask, walking through the empty rooms with her arms crossed. "It seems like a lot of house for one person. What if you can't keep up with the mortgage payments?" Her concern felt genuine at the time, but there was something underneath it that I couldn't quite identify. Envy maybe. Or resentment that I'd achieved something she hadn't yet. Our relationship had always been complicated. Growing up, Maya was the outgoing one, the charmer who could talk her way out of any trouble. I was the responsible one, the planner, the sister who did her homework and helped mom with dinner while Maya was out with friends or at some social event. Our parents had divorced when I was 16, and Maya was 12, and somehow I'd become the stability in her life, the one she turned to when things went wrong. After high school, I'd put myself through design school while working part-time jobs, building my freelance business slowly and carefully. Maya had bounced between 3 different colleges before finally graduating with a communications degree, funded largely by our grandmother's inheritance, that she'd burned through in 2 years. When she needed a cosigner for her apartment lease, I'd helped. When she couldn't make rent 1 month, I'd covered it. When her car broke down, I'd given her rides until she could afford repairs. I told myself it was what sisters did for each other. Maya would have done the same for me if our situations were reversed. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Maya took help graciously, but she rarely offered it in return. She was the kind of person who assumed someone else would handle the practical details, while she focused on living her life. The house had been my declaration of independence from that dynamic. My space, my mortgage, my responsibility. No roommates, no family drama, no one else's mess to clean up. I'd spent months decorating it exactly how I wanted, painting the walls in colors that made me happy, arranging my furniture in art prints and houseplants until everything felt perfect. It was the first place I'd ever lived that felt truly like home. The morning of my surgery, I'd been working on a logo design for a local coffee shop, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of green tea, watching the rain through the window. The pain in my side had been getting worse for days, but I'd been ignoring it, pushing through because I had deadlines to meet and bills to pay. Freelancing meant no sick days, no health insurance through an employer, no safety net beyond what I'd managed to save. When the pain became unbearable, and I finally called my doctor, everything happened so fast. The diagnosis, the ambulance, the surgery. I barely had time to grab my phone charger and call Maya before they were wheeling me into the operating room. The last thing I remember thinking before the anesthesia kicked in was that this would all be over soon, that I'd be back home in a day or two, back to my normal life. Recovery was harder than anyone had prepared me for. The infection meant additional surgery, stronger antibiotics, and a much longer hospital stay than the standard appendectomy. Days blurred together in a haze of pain medication and uncomfortable sleep. I watched terrible daytime television, tried to work on my laptop when I felt strong enough, and waited for Maya to visit. The hospital staff was kind but busy. My nurse Patricia was a woman in her 50s who'd clearly seen everything during her career. She had a no-nonsense attitude that I found comforting, and she didn't push when I deflected questions about my family situation. "Some people just don't know how to handle hospitals," she said one afternoon, when I mentioned that my sister was probably just busy with work. "Doesn't mean they don't care," but as the days turned into weeks, it became harder to make excuses. Maya's social media was active, filled with photos from happy hours and weekend brunches, check-ins at trendy restaurants and bars. She was clearly not sitting by her phone waiting for updates about my condition. She was living her life as if nothing had happened, as if her sister wasn't lying in a hospital bed, wondering why she felt so alone. I tried calling her several times, but the calls went straight to voicemail. I sent text messages that showed as delivered but never received responses. Her Instagram stories showed a busy social calendar, work events, late nights out with friends I didn't recognize. In one video, she was laughing at some inside joke, wine glass in hand, looking carefree and beautiful in the way that had always come naturally to her. The loneliness was almost worse than the physical pain. Lying in that hospital bed, I started to see our relationship more clearly than I ever had before. Maya wasn't just busy or bad with hospitals. She was actively choosing not to be there for me, the same way she'd chosen not to be there for me in smaller ways throughout our lives. I'd been so focused on being the supportive older sister that I'd never stopped to ask what I was getting in return. Dr. Rodriguez checked on me daily, a kind man in his early 40s, who explained everything in terms I could understand. The infection had been serious, he told me, but they'd caught it in time. I'd make a full recovery, but it would take time and I'd need to take things slowly for the next few weeks. No heavy lifting, no strenuous activity, plenty of rest. He asked repeatedly about my support system at home, whether I had someone who could help with groceries and basic tasks during my recovery. "My sister will help," I kept telling him, even as the words felt less true each time I said them. "She's just busy with work right now." The truth was, I didn't have much of a support system beyond Maya. I'd been so focused on building my business and saving for the house that I'd let most of my friendships fade. There was my neighbor Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman, who sometimes brought me vegetables from her garden, but I barely knew her well enough to ask for help. There were my clients, professional relationships that didn't extend beyond project deadlines and payment schedules. I had college friends scattered across the country, people I exchanged holiday cards with, but hadn't spoken to in months. It was a sobering realization, lying there in that hospital bed. I'd been so proud of my independence, but I'd confused isolation with self-reliance. I'd built a life that looked successful from the outside, but felt hollow when I actually needed support. On my final day in the hospital, Patricia helped me gather my belongings and reviewed my discharge instructions. I had prescriptions to fill, follow-up appointments to schedule, and strict orders to rest for at least another week before returning to normal activities. "Is your ride here?" she asked, checking her watch. I'd called an Uber, too embarrassed to admit that no one was coming to pick me up. They're on their way, I lied, grateful that she was too busy to ask more questions. The ride home was surreal. 3 weeks felt like 3 months when you'd been trapped in a hospital room. The city looked the same, but somehow different, like I was seeing it through new eyes. My neighborhood looked exactly as I'd left it, tree-lined streets, and well-maintained houses, the kind of area where people took pride in their yards and knew their neighbors' names. It had felt safe and welcoming when I'd moved in. Now it just felt quiet and empty. Standing on my front porch with my discharge bag and wilted flowers from the hospital gift shop, I fumbled for my keys with hands that still shook slightly from weakness and medication. The key slid into the lock, but wouldn't turn. I tried again, thinking maybe I was just weak from the surgery, but the lock definitely wasn't working. For a moment, I wondered if Maya had changed the locks for security reasons, though that seemed unlike her. That's when I heard the voices inside. Definitely female, definitely familiar. One was Maya's laugh, bright and musical, the sound she made when she was genuinely enjoying herself. But there were other voices too, people I didn't recognize. Music was playing, something upbeat and contemporary that I definitely hadn't left on when I went to the hospital. I rang the doorbell, feeling ridiculous for ringing my own doorbell, but not knowing what else to do. The music stopped abruptly, and I heard Maya's voice, suddenly sharp with panic. Shit, shit, shit. Footsteps hurried across my hardwood floors, the ones I'd spent a weekend refinishing by hand. The door opened, and there was Maya, but not the Maya I remembered. Her hair was different, shorter and blonde instead of her natural brown. She was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, expensive-looking jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. But it was her expression that shocked me most. Not relief or joy at seeing me home safe, but pure undiluted panic. "Jess," she said, her voice unnaturally high. "You're home." Behind her I could see into my living room, and nothing looked right. My furniture was still there, but it had been rearranged. There were new decorative pillows on my couch, different art on the walls, plants I didn't recognize, in corners where my carefully chosen pieces used to sit. And there were people, 3 or 4 young women I'd never seen before, frozen in the middle of what looked like a dinner party in my dining room. "Maya," I said slowly, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. "What's going on?" She stepped outside and closed the door behind her, cutting off my view of the strangers in my house. "You should have called," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "I would have picked you up from the hospital." "I did call," I replied, my voice getting stronger as confusion gave way to anger. "I called and texted for 3 weeks. You never responded." "My phone's been acting up," she said quickly, not meeting my eyes. "And work has been crazy. I've barely had time to breathe." "Maya, why can't I get into my house?" She bit her lip, a gesture I remembered from childhood, when she'd been caught doing something she wasn't supposed to do. "I changed the locks," she admitted. "For security, while you were gone. Without asking me, I was worried about break-ins. This neighborhood isn't as safe as you think." I stared at her, this stranger who looked like my sister, but was acting like someone I'd never met. "Who are those people in my house?" "Just some friends from work. We were having a little get-together." "In my house, while I was in the hospital." Maya's composure cracked slightly. "I was keeping an eye on the place, okay? Making sure everything was maintained. Those friends helped me with some of the upkeep." Something cold settled in my stomach. "What kind of upkeep?" "Just cleaning, organizing, that kind of thing. The place was kind of a mess when you left." That was a lie. I'd always been neat, organized to a fault. My house had been spotless when I left for the doctor that morning 3 weeks ago. But looking at Maya's face, I realized she was lying about more than just the state of my house. "I need my key," I said firmly. "Of course," Maya patted her pockets theatrically. "I think I left it inside." "Let me grab it." She disappeared back into the house, and I heard urgent whispered conversations. The sound of people moving quickly, the back door opening and closing. When she returned, she handed me a new key, shiny and obviously recently cut. "Here you go," she said, her smile too bright. "Home sweet home." The key worked, but as soon as I stepped inside, I knew something was fundamentally wrong. This wasn't just a matter of moved furniture or a dinner party. My house felt different, lived in by someone else. The air smelled different, like unfamiliar perfume and cooking spices I didn't use. There were shoes by the door that weren't mine, a coat hanging on my rack that I'd never seen before. The women who'd been in my dining room were gone, vanished out the back door along with most of the evidence of their gathering. But they'd left traces. Wine glasses in my sink that I didn't own, food in my refrigerator that I hadn't bought, a different brand of coffee in my cabinet. Maya followed me through the house, chattering nervously about how she'd been taking care of everything, how she'd cleaned and organized, and made sure everything was perfect for my return. But her words felt hollow, meaningless noise to cover up whatever was really happening here. In my bedroom, I stopped cold. My bed was made, but with sheets I didn't recognize. My dresser had been rearranged, my personal items moved around or missing entirely. The photograph of our grandmother that I kept on my nightstand was gone, replaced by a small succulent in a pot I'd never seen before. "Where's Grandma's picture?" I asked. Maya looked genuinely confused. "What picture?" "The one of Grandma Rose. It was on my nightstand." "Oh, that old thing. I put it somewhere safe. I'll find it for you." But she made no move to look for it, and I got the distinct impression that she had no idea where it was. Or worse, that she'd thrown it away.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I sank onto my bed, suddenly exhausted by more than just the surgery and recovery. My body was weak, my mind foggy from medication, but the reality of the situation was becoming clearer with each passing minute. Maya hadn't just been keeping an eye on my house, she'd been living in it. "Maya," I said quietly, "how long have you been staying here?" She perched on the edge of my chair, fidgeting with her new blonde hair. "Just a few nights here and there, to make sure everything was okay." "This is more than a few nights." "Okay, maybe I stayed here more often than that. But only because I was worried about the house sitting empty. Empty houses are targets for burglars." I looked around my bedroom again, taking in all the small changes that added up to something much bigger. "You moved in." "I didn't move in, you changed the locks, rearranged my furniture, had your friends over for dinner parties. You moved in." Maya's facade finally cracked completely. Tears filled her eyes, but instead of seeming remorseful, she looked angry. "You don't understand how hard this has been for me," she said. "Do you know how worried I was about you? How scared I was that something might happen to you? You never visited me in the hospital. I hate hospitals. You know that. They make me panic. You never even called." I was dealing with this in my own way. I stared at her, this person who shared my DNA, but seemed incapable of understanding the most basic concepts of family loyalty or respect. "By taking over my house, I was protecting it," she insisted. "And I was staying close to you in a way. Being in your space made me feel connected to you while you were gone." The words were so twisted, so far from any reasonable explanation, that I didn't know how to respond. Maya had always been good at making herself the victim in any situation, but this was beyond anything I'd experienced before. My phone rang, startling both of us. It was Dr. Rodriguez's office, calling to confirm my follow-up appointment. As I answered and spoke to the receptionist, scheduling my check-in for the following week, I watched Maya out of the corner of my eye. She was fidgeting constantly, checking her own phone, looking toward the door like she wanted to escape. When I hung up, she stood quickly. "I should probably get going," she said. "Let you rest and settle back in." "Maya, we need to talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about. I was helping and now you're home safe, and everything can go back to normal." But as she gathered her purse and the expensive coat I didn't recognize, I realized that nothing about this felt normal. Maya was acting like a teenager who'd been caught throwing a party while her parents were out of town, not like an adult woman who'd taken over her sister's house during a medical emergency. "Are you taking your things with you?" I asked. She paused at the door. "What things?" "Your clothes, your toiletries, whatever you brought here while you were staying." "Oh right. I'll come back for those later. When you're feeling better. I'd prefer if you took them now." Something flashed in her eyes, too quick for me to identify.
Anger, resentment, something that made me understand that this conversation was far from over. Fine, she said tightly. I'll grab a few things. She disappeared upstairs, and I heard her moving around in what I assumed was the guest bedroom. But when I climbed the stairs slowly, still weak from surgery, I found her in my master bedroom, pulling clothes from my closet. Those are my clothes, I said. Maya turned, holding one of my favorite sweaters. I borrowed this. I was going to wash it and put it back. You borrowed my clothes, just a few things. I didn't think you'd mind. I looked around my bedroom with new eyes, taking inventory of what was missing or different. My jewelry box had been moved. My favorite perfume was nearly empty. The expensive moisturizer I'd splurged on last month was almost gone. Maya, have you been living in my bedroom? Of course not. I've been sleeping in the guest room. But when I walked down the hall to check the guest room, it was obviously unused. The bed was still made with the same sheets I'd put on it months ago, and there was no sign that anyone had been staying there recently. Back in my room, Maya was stuffing clothes into a bag with quick, jerky movements. I really need to get going, she said without looking at me. I have plans tonight. With who? Just friends. The same friends who were having dinner in my house. She didn't answer, focusing intently on her packing. But I could see her hands shaking slightly, and I realized that whatever was happening here was bigger than just Maya staying at my house without permission. Maya, where have you been living? Before you started staying here. I have my own place. Where? You know where. The apartment downtown. But something in her tone made me doubt that. Maya had always been a terrible liar, and right now she sounded like someone trying very hard to keep track of a story that wasn't quite true. Have you been having trouble with rent? I asked gently. That question hit something, because Maya's careful composure cracked entirely. She sat down hard on my bed, the bag of stolen clothes forgotten beside her, and started crying. Not the pretty, delicate tears she'd perfected as a teenager, but ugly, desperate sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. Everything's falling apart, Jess, she said through the tears. Everything. I sat down beside her, my anger temporarily replaced by concern. Whatever Maya had done, whatever lies she'd told, she was clearly in real trouble. Tell me what's going on, I said. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of makeup across her skin. I lost my job 6 weeks ago. What happened? Budget cuts. They eliminated my entire department. 6 weeks ago, before my surgery, before I'd been in the hospital. Maya had been living in my house since before I'd even gotten sick. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was embarrassed, because I knew you'd want to fix everything, and I didn't want to be rescued by my big sister again. The irony of that statement, considering where we were sitting, wasn't lost on me. But I could hear the genuine pain in her voice, the frustration and shame that had been eating at her for over a month. So you've been staying here since then? She nodded miserably. I couldn't afford rent without my job. I was looking for work, I swear. But everything requires experience I don't have or pays so little that I'd barely cover expenses anyway. Maya, you should have told me. We could have figured something out. I was going to, but then you got sick, and I thought maybe I could just stay here temporarily while you recovered. And by the time you got home, I'd have a new job in my own place again. It was a plan that might have made sense if Maya had actually spent the last 3 weeks job hunting, instead of apparently hosting dinner parties and treating my house like her personal playground. But I could see that she genuinely believed her own rationalization, that she'd convinced herself this was a temporary solution rather than a fundamental violation of my trust and space. The people who were here when I came home, I said. Who were they? Maya's tears started again. Friends from my old job. They've been helping me network, trying to connect me with new opportunities. By having dinner parties in my house, we weren't partying, we were working, informal networking stuff. I wanted to believe her, but something about the scene I'd walked into had felt more social than professional. And Maya's explanation didn't account for the changes to my house, the rearranged furniture, the missing personal items. Maya, this can't continue. You understand that, right? She nodded, but I could see the panic creeping back into her expression. I know. I just need a little more time. How much time? A few weeks, maybe a month. A month. I have some leads on jobs, and I'm expecting a call back from this marketing agency downtown. If that works out, I could probably afford a studio apartment by the end of next month. I wanted to believe her, but Maya had always been optimistic about timelines when it came to solving her problems. A month could easily become 2 months, then 3, then longer, and I was in no position to support a long-term house guest while I was still recovering from surgery. I need you to find somewhere else to stay, I said as gently as I could. Tonight. The word tonight hit her like a physical blow. Jess, please. I have nowhere else to go. What about Mom? Maya made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Mom's boyfriend moved in 6 months ago. There's no room for me there, friends. I've been staying with different people here and there, but I've worn out my welcome pretty much everywhere. The picture was becoming clearer and more depressing by the minute. Maya hadn't just lost her job and been unable to pay rent. She'd been essentially homeless for weeks, bouncing between friends' couches and temporary arrangements, until my medical emergency had provided her with an empty house to colonize. Maya, I'm sorry you're going through this, but you can't solve your problems by taking over my life. I wasn't taking over your life. I was just staying here temporarily. You changed my locks, for security. You rearranged my furniture. I was just trying to make the space more functional. You threw away my grandmother's picture. I didn't throw it away. I put it somewhere safe. But she still couldn't tell me where, and I was beginning to understand that Maya's version of somewhere safe might mean gone forever. My grandmother's photograph wasn't just a picture. It was one of the few physical connections I had to the woman who'd helped raise me after our parents' divorce. Losing it felt like losing a piece of my history. I stood up slowly, my surgical site aching from the emotional stress as much as the physical exertion. I need you to pack your things and leave tonight. Maya looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I'm your sister. Yes, you are, and that's exactly why this hurts so much. She seemed to understand that she'd pushed me past the point of negotiation. With slow, defeated movements, she began gathering her belongings. But as she moved through my house, collecting items that were supposedly hers, I noticed how many things she was taking that I was pretty sure belonged to me. That's my laptop charger, I said as she unplugged it from the wall. I've been using it. Mine broke. Where's mine? I don't know. It stopped working. So she'd broken my charger and was now taking it as if it belonged to her. It was a small thing, but it felt representative of something much larger. Maya, I need you to only take things that actually belong to you. She paused in her packing, looking genuinely confused. What do you mean? I mean, don't take my clothes, my electronics, my personal items, but I've been using these things. That doesn't make them yours. For a moment I saw something in her expression that chilled me, not confusion or embarrassment, but genuine resentment that I was asking for my own belongings back. As if my recovery and return home was an inconvenience to her new lifestyle, rather than the natural order being restored. She finished packing in sullen silence, moving through my house, with the air of someone who was being unjustly evicted rather than someone who had violated her sister's trust during a medical emergency. When she was done, she had 2 large bags in a suitcase, far more belongings than someone should accumulate during a temporary stay. At the door, she turned back to me one more time. I hope you know this isn't easy for me either. I know, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. And I hope you know I was trying to help. That one was harder to respond to. Maya might have convinced herself that she'd been helping, but from where I stood, it looked like she'd taken advantage of my absence to solve her own problems at my expense. I'll call you in a few days, she said, when things settle down. I nodded, too exhausted to argue anymore. After she left, I sat down on my couch that had been rearranged by someone else, in my house that no longer felt entirely like mine. The silence was different now. Not the comfortable solitude I'd enjoyed before my surgery, but something heavier and more complicated. I was alone again, but now I understood exactly how alone I really was. As the evening light faded outside my windows, I began the process of taking inventory of my house and my life, trying to figure out what Maya had taken and what she'd left behind. But more than that, I was trying to understand how the sister I'd spent my life protecting and supporting could betray my trust so completely when I was at my most vulnerable. The pills Dr. Rodriguez had prescribed were making me drowsy, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Maya's face when I'd asked her to leave. Not sadness or remorse, but anger, as if I'd wronged her by coming home to my own house. Something told me this wasn't over. That whatever had driven Maya to take over my life during my absence was bigger than a lost job and unpaid rent. But I was too tired and too hurt to think about it clearly tonight. Tomorrow, I'd start figuring out what was missing and what needed to be changed back. Tomorrow, I'd try to understand what had really happened in my house during those 3 weeks. Tonight, I just needed to sleep in my own bed, in my own house, and try to feel safe again in the space that was supposed to be my sanctuary. I woke up the next morning to find my credit card had been declined at the pharmacy. Standing at the counter with my post-surgery medications, watching the pharmacist's sympathetic expression as she tried my card for the second time, I felt a familiar knot of dread forming in my stomach. The card had worked fine when I'd paid for my Uber home from the hospital yesterday. "Do you have another form of payment?" the pharmacist asked gently. I fumbled through my wallet, pulling out my debit card with shaking fingers. That one went through, but barely. The remaining balance on my account was less than what I'd had before going into the hospital. Much less. Back home, I called my credit card company from my kitchen table, surrounded by pill bottles and discharge paperwork. The customer service representative was professionally polite as she read through my recent transactions. Online shopping, restaurant charges, a payment to something called Luxe Beauty Salon, another to Nordstrom, charges at bars and clubs I'd never heard of. All of them from the past 3 weeks. All of them while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. "Ma'am, did you authorize these purchases?" the representative asked. "No," I said quietly. "I was in the hospital. Someone else has been using my card." "The fraud department would investigate," she assured me, "but it could take weeks to resolve. In the meantime, they'd cancel my current card and send a new one." I hung up feeling nauseous, and not from the surgery. Maya had my credit card information. I'd given it to her months ago when she'd offered to pick up some groceries for me during a particularly busy work week. She'd used it to order takeout for both of us, and I'd told her to keep the information handy in case of emergencies. I'd trusted her completely. My laptop was missing from my home office. I'd assumed Maya had taken it by mistake, but now I wondered if there was more to it. My laptop had all my passwords saved, my banking information, my client files, everything someone would need to access my accounts or steal my identity. I called Maya's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried 3 more times throughout the morning, each call going unanswered. Finally, I sent a text message. "We need to talk. Call me back immediately." While I waited for her response, I went through my house more carefully than I had the night before. In my bedroom, I discovered that several pieces of jewelry were missing, including the pearl earrings our grandmother had left me. In my bathroom, expensive skincare products I'd saved up to buy were gone, replaced with cheaper drugstore versions. In my closet, my best clothes were missing, the ones I wore to client meetings and special occasions. Maya hadn't just been staying in my house. She'd been living my life, using my things, spending my money, presenting herself as me to the world. The thought made me feel violated in a way that went beyond simple theft. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Can't talk right now. At a job interview, we'll call later." I stared at the message, trying to decode what was real and what was another lie. Was she really at a job interview, or was she avoiding me because she knew I'd discovered the credit card fraud? And if she was at an interview, what was she wearing? My clothes that she'd stolen from my closet. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Maya hadn't just been using my house as a temporary shelter. She'd been using my identity, my credit, my belongings to rebuild her life after losing her job. She'd turned my medical emergency into an opportunity for identity theft. I spent the next hour on the phone with my bank, my other credit card companies, and my insurance company. The picture that emerged was worse than I'd imagined. Maya had accessed my online banking and transferred money from my savings to my checking account to cover the credit card bills she'd been running up. She'd used my information to apply for a new credit card in my name, one that had been approved and was probably sitting in my mailbox right now. We can put a freeze on your credit, the bank representative told me. That will prevent any new accounts from being opened without your explicit permission. I agreed to the freeze, along with new passwords for all my accounts and a review of every transaction from the past month. By the time I finished the calls, it was afternoon, and I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. The stress was making my surgical site ache, and I was supposed to be resting, not dealing with financial crimes committed by my own sister. Maya finally called back as I was heating up a can of soup for lunch, the only food left in my house that she hadn't eaten or thrown away. "Hey," she said, her voice artificially bright. "How are you feeling? Like I've been robbed," I said without preamble. There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean you've been using my credit cards, Maya. You've been spending my money for weeks." "Oh, that." Her voice deflated. "I was going to pay you back." "With what money? You don't have a job." "I told you I'm interviewing, and I needed some things for interviews. Professional clothes, a haircut, that kind of thing." "You spent over $2,000, Maya, on clothes and restaurants and beauty treatments. That's not interview preparation, that's a shopping spree." "It's not as much as you think, and some of those charges were for things for the house. Groceries, cleaning supplies." I looked around my empty kitchen at the bare refrigerator and the cleaning supplies I'd had to buy this morning, because there were none left under my sink. "What groceries? What cleaning supplies?" "Well, we ate the food, and I used the cleaning stuff to keep the house nice for you." The casual way she said "we" sent a chill down my spine. "Who is we, Maya?" "Just some friends who helped me out while you were gone." "You mean the people I found in my house yesterday?" "They were being supportive during a difficult time. They were eating food and drinking wine that I paid for without my permission." Maya's voice started to take on the defensive edge. "I remembered from our childhood arguments. I didn't think you'd mind. You've always been generous. Being generous is offering to help. What you did is called theft." "That's a really harsh word, Jess." "It's the accurate word." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, Maya alternating between tearful apologies and justifications that made no sense. She promised to pay me back, though she couldn't say when or how. She insisted that everything she'd done was for practical reasons, though she couldn't explain why she'd needed a $100 facial or designer jeans for job interviews. Finally, I cut through her rambling explanations. "Maya, where is my laptop?" "What laptop?" "My work laptop. It's missing from my office." "Oh, right, I borrowed it. Mine crashed and I needed it for job applications." "Where is it now?" "At my friend's place. I'll get it back to you." "Which friend?" "Just someone from work." "You don't know her." "I need it back today, Maya. All my work files are on there." "I'll try, but she might be using it for something important." The idea that my laptop, with my client information and my livelihood on it, was in the hands of some stranger who thought her needs were more important than mine, made me see red. "Maya, you need to get my laptop, and bring it here within the next 2 hours, or I'm calling the police." "You wouldn't call the cops on your own sister." "Try me." She hung up without saying goodbye. I spent the next hour trying to work on my phone, responding to client emails and attempting to salvage projects that were due this week. Working on a phone screen was frustrating and inefficient, but I couldn't afford to lose clients while dealing with Maya's chaos. At exactly 2 hours after our phone call, Maya appeared at my door with my laptop bag. But when I opened it, I knew immediately that something was wrong. The laptop was there, but it had been factory reset. All my files, all my saved passwords, all my client work, gone. "What happened to my files?" I asked. Maya wouldn't meet my eyes. "There was some kind of virus. My friend's tech guy said the only way to fix it was to wipe everything clean." "You let a stranger wipe my work computer." "He was trying to help." I stared at her, this person who shared my DNA, but seemed incapable of understanding the magnitude of what she'd done. My laptop contained 3 years of freelance work, client files that couldn't be replaced, financial records, personal photos, everything that made up my professional and personal life. "Did you back up my files before they wiped it?" "I don't know, the tech guy handled all that." "Maya, do you understand what you've done?" My entire business was on this computer. Can't you just recreate the files? The question was so fundamentally ignorant of how my work functioned that I couldn't even respond. How do you recreate 3 years of client communications, project files, design assets, financial records? How do you explain to clients that you've lost all their work because your sister gave your computer to a stranger who decided to erase it? I need contact information for this tech person, I said. Maybe the files can be recovered. I don't have his information. My friend handled everything. Then I need your friend's information. Maya's face went through several expressions, settling on stubborn defensiveness. I don't want to get her involved in our family drama. Our family drama? Maya, this is a crime. You stole my property and allowed someone to destroy my work files. This isn't drama, it's a felony. The word dramatic was the final straw. I'd been trying to handle this situation with patience and understanding, making allowances for Maya's difficult circumstances and our family history. But there was nothing dramatic about discovering that your sister had committed identity theft and destroyed your livelihood while you were recovering from surgery. Get out, I said quietly. Jess, don't be like this. Get out of my house. We can figure this out together. No, we can't. Because you don't think you've done anything wrong. Maya's expression shifted again, the fake remorse dropping away to reveal something harder underneath. You know what? Maybe I don't think I've done anything so terrible. You've always had everything handed to you. The house, the successful business, the perfect life. I was struggling, and you were unconscious in a hospital bed. I made the best of a bad situation. By stealing from me. By surviving, by doing what I had to do. At my expense. You can afford it. The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. Maya genuinely believed that because I had managed to build a stable life for myself, I owed her access to it. That my hard work and careful planning gave her the right to take whatever she needed. I want everything back, I said. My credit cards, my jewelry, my clothes, everything you took. And I want contact information for everyone who was involved in this. I don't have most of that stuff anymore. What do you mean? Some of it I sold, some of it I gave away, some of it got lost. You sold my grandmother's jewelry. Maya had the grace to look slightly ashamed. I needed money for rent.
You don't pay rent. You've been living here. For before I had debts to pay off. The hits kept coming. Not only had Maya stolen my belongings, she'd sold them to pay for her previous financial mistakes. My grandmother's pearls, the ones I'd planned to wear on my wedding day someday, were gone forever, sold to a pawn shop to cover my sister's irresponsibility. Maya, I'm going to give you one chance to make this right. You have 24 hours to return everything you can and provide me with a complete list of what you sold or gave away, including where and to whom. If you don't, I'm filing a police report. You're really going to have your own sister arrested. You're really going to keep stealing from me after I almost died. You didn't almost die, it was appendix surgery. The dismissive way she said it, as if my medical emergency had been an inconvenience to her rather than a serious health crisis, crystallized everything I'd been trying not to see about our relationship. Maya didn't care about me as a person, she cared about what I could provide for her. 24 hours, I repeated. After she left, I sat in my empty house, surrounded by the evidence of my sister's betrayal, and tried to figure out how I'd missed the signs that she was capable of something like this. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the signs had been there all along. The times she'd borrowed money and never paid it back. The way she'd always found excuses when I needed help, but expected immediate assistance when she was in trouble. The casual way she'd used my things without asking, assuming that what was mine was also hers by extension. I'd enabled this behavior for years, telling myself that sisters supported each other, that Maya was just going through a rough patch, that she'd learn responsibility eventually. Instead, I'd taught her that there were no consequences for taking advantage of me. My phone rang, interrupting my dark thoughts. It was Mrs. Thompson from next door, her voice concerned. "Jessica dear, I hope you don't mind me calling. I just wanted to check on you after your surgery." "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Thompson. I brought some soup over while you were in the hospital.
but your sister said you weren't ready for visitors yet. My sister, such a lovely girl, she's been taking such good care of your house. I saw her coming and going, keeping everything tidy, bringing friends over to help with the yard work. Yard work. I looked out my window at my small front lawn, which was noticeably overgrown and weedy. Whatever Maya and her friends had been doing in my yard, it wasn't maintenance. Mrs. Thompson, when you brought the soup, what did my sister tell you exactly? Oh, she was very helpful, explained that you were having complications and needed complete rest. She took the soup and promised to make sure you got it when you were feeling better. I never received any soup. Maya had intercepted my neighbor's kindness and probably eaten it herself or shared it with her freeloading friends. She also asked me to keep an eye on the house, make sure no strangers were hanging around. I thought that was very responsible of her. Did you notice anything unusual? Any strangers coming and going? Well, there were quite a few young people visiting. Your sister explained that they were helping with house maintenance and keeping her company during the stressful time. Such a good support system. Maya had spun an entire narrative for my neighbors, painting herself as the devoted sister taking care of everything during my illness, while actually throwing parties and living it up at my expense. She'd even managed to get Mrs. Thompson to act as an unwitting accomplice, watching the house to make sure Maya's activities weren't interrupted. Mrs. Thompson, I appreciate you checking on me. If you see any unusual activity at my house in the future, would you mind calling me directly? Of course, dear. I hope you're feeling better. After we hung up, I realized that Maya's deception had been much more sophisticated than I'd initially understood. She hadn't just taken advantage of my absence, she'd created an entire fiction to cover her tracks, using my neighbor's concern for my welfare to enable her activities. I spent the evening documenting everything I could remember about what was missing or damaged. The list was longer than I'd expected. Beyond the obvious items like jewelry and clothes, Maya had taken small things that added up to a significant violation. My good towels, replaced with threadbare ones. My expensive coffee, replaced with a cheaper brand. My prescription skincare products, which she couldn't legally use even if she'd paid for them. But it was the destruction of my laptop files that hurt the most. Those weren't just work documents, they were my professional reputation, my financial stability, my ability to support myself while recovering from surgery. Maya had casually destroyed years of my life's work because she'd needed to use my computer for job applications. The next morning, I called my insurance company to see if any of the stolen items were covered under my homeowner's policy. The representative was sympathetic, but explained that theft by a family member was a complicated situation. I'd need to file a police report to make a claim, and even then, recovery was unlikely since Maya clearly didn't have the assets to pay restitution. Have you considered asking your sister to return the items voluntarily? The representative suggested. I did. She says she sold most of them. I'm sorry to hear that. Family theft cases are always particularly difficult. That afternoon, Maya showed up at my door with a cardboard box and a defensive expression. Here, she said, shoving the box toward me. Everything I could find. Inside were a few items of my clothing, obviously worn and not cleaned, some cheap jewelry that wasn't mine, and a handful of my personal photographs, bent and damaged. Nothing of real value, none of the expensive items she'd stolen. This is it? I asked. It's everything I have left. Where's my grandmother's jewelry? I told you I sold it. To who? A pawn shop downtown. Which one? I don't remember the name. Another lie. Maya might not remember many things, but she'd definitely remember where she'd sold our grandmother's jewelry. The pawn shop would have required identification and kept records. She was protecting her ability to sell more stolen goods in the future. Maya, this isn't even close to making things right. It's all I can do right now. No, it's all you're willing to do right now. She shifted uncomfortably, not meeting my eyes. Look, I know you're mad, but we're family. We should be able to work this out without involving lawyers or police or whatever. We're family, which is exactly why this hurts so much. I never meant to hurt you, but you did hurt me. And you're still hurting me by refusing to take responsibility for what you've done. Maya's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it quickly. Her expression shifted, becoming more anxious. I have to go. Who's texting you? Just a friend, the same friends who were in my house. The ones who helped you spend my money and destroy my property. They're not bad people, Jess. They were just trying to help me through a difficult time. By helping you commit crimes. By being there for me when my own sister was unconscious and unavailable. The way she framed it, as if my medical emergency was a personal betrayal rather than a life-threatening situation beyond my control, revealed how deeply twisted her thinking had become. In Maya's mind, she was the victim of my illness, entitled to compensation for the inconvenience it had caused her. I'm filing a police report tomorrow, I said. You're really going to do this? You've given me no choice. I thought family meant more to you than money and possessions. Family should mean not stealing from each other when one of you is in the hospital. Maya left without another word, but not before I saw her take a photograph of my front door with her phone. I wasn't sure what she was planning, but I was certain it wasn't good. That evening, I received a call from my mother. Her voice was tight with disapproval. Jessica, what is this? I hear about you threatening to have Maya arrested. She told you about that. She's very upset. She says you're blowing things out of proportion. Mom, Maya stole thousands of dollars from me while I was in the hospital. She destroyed my work files and sold my personal belongings. How is that blowing things out of proportion? She was trying to take care of your house by committing identity theft. She made some mistakes, but she's family. You don't call the police on family. I realized that Maya had gotten to my mother first, spinning the story to make herself the victim of my unreasonable demands. My mother, who had always favored Maya's dramatic flair over my steady reliability, was already taking sides. Mom, Maya committed serious crimes. If she were anyone else, I would have called the police immediately. But she's not anyone else. She's your sister, and she's going through a hard time. I was going through a hard time too. I almost died from complications after surgery, and instead of visiting me or supporting me, Maya decided to rob me blind. Don't be so dramatic. There was that word again. Dramatic. As if my outrage at being betrayed by my sister during a medical emergency was an overreaction rather than a completely reasonable response to criminal behavior. I'm not being dramatic, Mom. I'm being realistic about what Maya did and what the consequences should be. She's willing to work out a payment plan. With what money? She doesn't have a job. She's interviewing. She's been interviewing for months. Meanwhile, I'm out thousands of dollars and my entire work computer has been wiped clean. My mother was quiet for a moment. Maybe you should look at this as an opportunity to reassess your priorities. What does that mean? Maybe you've become too focused on material things. Maya needed help, and you weren't available to provide it. I stared at the phone, stunned by the implication that I was somehow at fault for Maya's crimes because I'd been unconscious in a hospital bed. Mom, are you seriously suggesting that this is my fault? I'm suggesting that family should support each other, and maybe Maya felt like she had no other options. She had other options. She could have asked for help before resorting to theft. She could have stayed with friends or found a cheaper apartment or gotten a part-time job. She chose to steal from me instead. She was scared and desperate. So she decided to make me scared and desperate too. The conversation continued for another few minutes, but it was clear that my mother had already made up her mind. Maya was the victim of unfortunate circumstances, and I was the selfish sister who cared more about money than family. The fact that Maya had committed multiple felonies while I was fighting for my life in a hospital was irrelevant compared to the sacred bond of sisterhood. After my mother hung up, I sat in my quiet house and realized that I was truly alone in this situation. Maya had successfully positioned herself as the wronged party, and my family was rallying around her rather than supporting the actual victim of her crimes. But I wasn't going to back down. Tomorrow, I would file that police report, regardless of what my family thought. Maya needed to face consequences for her actions, and I needed to protect myself from further victimization. The house felt different now, tainted by the knowledge of what had happened here during my absence. Every room held evidence of Maya's betrayal, from the rearranged furniture to the missing personal items, to the violated sense of security that might never fully return. I'd spent years building this life, this safe space, this independence. Maya had destroyed it in 3 weeks, not just by stealing my belongings, but by destroying my ability to trust the people closest to me. As I locked my doors and turned off the lights, I made a decision. This was war now, whether my family understood it or not. Maya had declared war on me the moment she decided to exploit my medical emergency for her own benefit. Tomorrow, I would start fighting back. The police station was busier than I expected for a Tuesday morning. I sat in the hard plastic chair, clutching my folder of documentation, waiting for Detective Morrison to call my name. 3 days had passed since my ultimatum to Maya, and she'd made her choice clear by ignoring my calls and apparently convincing our entire family that I was the villain in this situation. Detective Morrison turned out to be a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened carefully as I explained the situation, taking notes and asking clarifying questions that made me feel like she understood the severity of what had happened. "Identity theft by a family member is more common than people think," she said when I finished my account. "And it's often the most devastating because of the emotional component. You're dealing with both a crime and a betrayal of trust." She walked me through the process of filing the report, explaining that credit card fraud, identity theft, and theft of property over a certain value were all felonies. The case would be investigated, and if charges were filed, Maya could face significant jail time. "Are you prepared for the possibility that your sister could be arrested?" Detective Morrison asked gently. The question hit harder than I expected. Despite everything Maya had done, the thought of her in handcuffs still made my stomach turn. But then I thought about my wiped laptop, my grandmother's jewelry sold to strangers, the violation of my home and my trust during the most vulnerable period of my life. "Yes," I said firmly, "I'm prepared for that." After leaving the police station, I drove to the hospital for my follow-up appointment with Dr. Rodriguez. He was pleased with my physical recovery, but concerned about my stress levels and the dark circles under my eyes. "Are you getting enough rest?" he asked, checking my surgical site. "Not really. I've been dealing with some family issues. Family stress can significantly impact healing. Is there anything I can do to help?" I almost laughed at the question. Unless he could arrest my sister and restore my financial security, there wasn't much medical intervention could do for my current problems. "I'm managing," I said. Instead, Dr. Rodriguez nodded, but made a note in my chart. "I'm going to recommend a counselor who specializes in trauma recovery. What you've been through medically is significant, but if you're dealing with additional stressors, it might help to have professional support." I took the counselor's card, thinking that she was going to have her work cut out for her, when I explained that the additional stressor was my sister's crime spree. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls with banks, insurance companies, and credit monitoring services. I was learning an entirely new vocabulary around identity theft and fraud recovery, navigating systems designed to help victims of financial crimes. Everyone was sympathetic and professional, but the process was exhausting and time-consuming. My work situation was dire. Without my laptop files, I'd lost not just completed projects but also client contact information, contracts, and 3 years of carefully organized business records. I was starting over from nothing, trying to rebuild my freelance practice while dealing with the financial aftermath of Maya's spending spree. Some clients were understanding when I explained that I'd lost their files due to a family emergency. Others were less forgiving, especially when I couldn't provide the final deliverables they'd paid for. I offered to redo work at no charge, but that required time I didn't have, and energy I was lacking. The loneliness was the hardest part. My mother had called twice more to lecture me about family loyalty and forgiveness. My father, who'd remarried and lived across the country, sent a brief email suggesting that I was overreacting to sibling drama. Extended family members who'd heard Maya's version of events seemed to think I was being petty and vindictive. Only Mrs. Thompson showed genuine concern for my well-being. She brought soup again, this time delivering it directly to me, and listened with growing horror as I explained what had really been happening in my house during my hospital stay. "That poor girl seemed so devoted to taking care of everything," she said, shaking her head. I had no idea she was taking advantage of your situation. She's always been good at making herself look like the victim, I said. What will happen to her now? That's up to the justice system. Mrs. Thompson nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes people need to face consequences before they can change. I'd been thinking about consequences a lot, not just legal consequences for Maya, but the broader consequences of the enabling pattern our family had created around her behavior. For years we'd all made excuses for her, cleaned up her messes, and protected her from the natural results of her choices. Maybe it was time for that to stop. 2 weeks after filing the police report, Detective Morrison called with an update. Maya had been questioned, and had admitted to using my credit cards and taking items from my house. However, she was claiming that everything had been done with my implied permission, since I'd given her access to my home and credit card information in the past. It's her word against yours about the permission issue, Detective Morrison explained. But the credit card companies have clear fraud protections, and the timing of the transactions while you were hospitalized supports your case. What happens next? The district attorney's office will review the case and decide whether to file charges. Given the amount of money involved and the documentation you've provided, I expect they'll move forward with prosecution. The word prosecution felt heavy and final. Once the legal system took over, there would be no going back, no family reconciliation that could undo the criminal charges. Maya would have a record that would follow her for the rest of her life. I tried to feel guilty about that possibility, but mostly I felt relief that someone in authority was finally taking the situation seriously. My first appointment with Dr. Jessica Chen, the counselor Dr. Rodriguez had recommended, was awkward but necessary. She specialized in trauma recovery, and had experience with clients dealing with betrayal by family members. It's important to understand that what you're experiencing is a form of grief, she explained during our initial session. You're mourning the loss of the relationship you thought you had with your sister, and the loss of the family dynamic you believed existed. I keep thinking I should have seen it coming, I admitted. There were signs that Maya was struggling, that she was capable of this kind of behavior. Hindsight can be cruel that way, but even if you had recognized the signs, that wouldn't have made you responsible for preventing her choices. Dr. Chen helped me understand that my guilt about Maya's situation was misplaced. I wasn't responsible for her financial problems, her unemployment, or her decision to solve those problems by committing crimes against me. My only responsibility was to myself and my own recovery. Setting boundaries isn't cruel, she reminded me. It's necessary for your own well-being. 1 month after my discharge from the hospital, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, it was Maya calling from what I assumed was a friend's phone, since I'd blocked her number. "Jess, please don't hang up," she said quickly. "What do you want, Maya?" "I want to apologize. Really apologize, not just say sorry to make this go away." I waited, curious to hear what this new approach would sound like. "I've been talking to a counselor, and she's helping me understand how my actions affected you. I was so focused on my own problems that I couldn't see how much I was hurting you. You destroyed my livelihood, Maya. You stole from me while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. I know, and I know saying sorry isn't enough. But I want you to know that I understand now how wrong I was." There was something different in her voice, less of the defensive whining I'd grown accustomed to, and more genuine remorse. But I'd heard Maya apologize before, and the apologies never translated into changed behavior. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want to make things right. I got a job part-time at a coffee shop, and I'm saving money to pay you back. It'll take time, but I can set up a payment plan." "Maya, you stole thousands of dollars and destroyed irreplaceable work files. A part-time coffee shop job isn't going to fix this. I know it's not enough, but it's a start, and I want you to know that I've cut ties with the people who were helping me spend your money. They weren't real friends anyway." This was new information. "What do you mean?" "The people who were at your house that day, the ones I said were helping me network. They weren't really trying to help me find a job. They were using me to get access to a nice house and someone else's money. When I told them the party was over, they dropped me completely." So Maya had finally figured out that her new friends were using her the same way she'd been using me. It was a start toward self-awareness, but it didn't undo the damage. "Maya, I appreciate that you're starting to understand what happened," But I can't just forget about this because you got a job and realized your friends were users. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can change. The time to prove that was before you committed crimes against me. There was a long pause, so there's nothing I can do. No way to fix this. You can face the consequences of your actions and learn from them. That's how people change. Does that mean you're going to let them prosecute me? Maya, I'm not letting them do anything. The justice system is handling this case based on the evidence. Your actions have consequences, and those consequences don't depend on my forgiveness. She started crying then, the ugly sobs I remembered from childhood when she realized that tears weren't going to get her out of trouble. I could go to jail, Jess. Yes, you could. That's what happens when people commit felonies. But I'm your sister. You're my sister who committed felonies against me while I was fighting for my life in a hospital. The conversation ended with Maya begging me to talk to the prosecutor, to ask them to drop the charges, to somehow make this all go away. I told her that ship had sailed the moment she decided to steal my identity and destroy my property. After hanging up, I felt drained but also strangely relieved. Maya was finally experiencing real consequences for her behavior, and while it was painful to watch, it was also necessary. 3 months after my surgery, I received notice that the district attorney was moving forward with charges against Maya. She would be arraigned on multiple felony counts including identity theft, credit card fraud, and theft of property. If convicted, she could face up to 5 years in prison. My mother called within hours of Maya's arrest, hysterical with rage and blame. "How could you do this to your own sister?" she screamed into the phone. "I didn't do anything to Maya. Maya did this to herself. She could go to prison because of you. She could go to prison because of her own choices. We're talking about your sister, not some stranger. My sister is the one who chose to commit crimes against me. Being family doesn't exempt her from consequences." My mother hung up on me, but not before declaring that I was dead to the family if I didn't drop the charges. It was a painful ultimatum, but also clarifying. If my family's love was conditional on my willingness to be victimized by Maya without seeking justice, then it wasn't really love at all. The trial process was long and emotionally draining. Maya pled not guilty initially, claiming that she'd had permission to use my credit cards and take items from my house. Her lawyer painted me as a vindictive sister who was criminalizing a family misunderstanding. But the evidence was overwhelming. Credit card statements showing charges while I was unconscious in the hospital, bank records of transfers I hadn't authorized, witness statements from neighbors who'd seen Maya hosting parties in my house, and her own admissions to the police about taking my belongings. 6 months after the charges were filed, Maya changed her plea to guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. She would serve 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation, during which she would be required to attend counseling and make restitution payments to me. I felt no satisfaction watching her sentencing. Maya looked small and defeated standing before the judge, nothing like the confident party host who'd been living in my house while I recovered from surgery. But I also felt a sense of closure that had been missing throughout this entire ordeal. Justice had been served, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. Maya needed to understand that actions have consequences, and I needed to know that I could protect myself from people who would take advantage of my vulnerability. The restitution payments were small, $25 a month, which would take decades to add up to what Maya had stolen. But the money wasn't really the point anymore. The point was that the justice system had validated my experience and held Maya accountable for her crimes. My family's reaction to the sentencing was predictably dramatic. My mother sent a letter full of accusations and guilt trips, claiming that I'd destroyed our family over money. My father called to express his disappointment that I hadn't found a way to resolve things privately. Several relatives blocked me on social media and made it clear that I was no longer welcome at family gatherings. It hurt, but it also revealed the toxic dynamics that had enabled Maya's behavior for years. My family was more comfortable maintaining the illusion of harmony than dealing with the reality of abuse and criminality within our ranks. Dr. Chen helped me process the grief of losing not just Maya, but the entire family structure I'd grown up believing in. Sometimes healing requires walking away from people who refuse to acknowledge harm, she reminded me. Rebuilding my business was harder than I'd expected, but also more rewarding. Without my old files to rely on, I had to approach each project with fresh eyes and new energy. Some clients appreciated my honesty about what had happened and became even more loyal. Others moved on, which created space for new relationships built on trust and mutual respect. I invested in better security systems for my house and my digital life, new locks, security cameras, identity monitoring services, and strict protocols about who had access to my personal information. The house felt safe again, but it was a different kind of safety, earned through experience rather than assumed through naivety. 6 months after Maya's sentencing, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Rodriguez, who I hadn't seen since my final follow-up appointment, called to say that a young woman claiming to be my sister was asking about my medical records. I wanted you to know because patient privacy is paramount, and we would never release information without your explicit written consent, he explained. Maya was apparently trying to access my medical files, possibly to support some kind of appeal, or to gather information for another scheme. It was a reminder that her criminal thinking hadn't necessarily changed just because she'd been caught and sentenced. I thanked Dr. Rodriguez for the warning and made a note to alert my other healthcare providers about the potential for fraudulent inquiries. 1 year after waking up from surgery to find my sister had taken over my life, I was finally beginning to feel like myself again. My business was thriving, my health was fully restored, and I'd built a support network of genuine friends and professionals who respected my boundaries. Mrs. Thompson had become more than just a neighbor. She was a surrogate grandmother who checked on me regularly and celebrated my successes. Dr. Chen continued to provide counseling as I navigated the ongoing process of rebuilding my life and relationships. I'd even started dating again, meeting David through a client referral. He was a software developer who understood the importance of digital security and didn't think I was paranoid for being careful about personal information. When I told him about Maya's crimes, he was appropriately shocked and supportive, never once suggesting that I should have handled things differently. The first restitution check arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 1 year after Maya's sentencing. $25, made out in Maya's careful handwriting, with a memo line that read payment 1 of 240. If she made every payment on time, she'd finish paying me back in 20 years. I deposited the check not because I needed the money, but because completing the restitution was part of Maya's sentence and hopefully part of her rehabilitation. Whether she would actually make all 240 payments remained to be seen. That evening, I sat in my restored living room, surrounded by new furniture I'd chosen myself and artwork from local artists I'd commissioned. The house felt like home again, but it was a different home than the one I'd left to go to the hospital 2 years earlier. This home was built on the foundation of hard-earned wisdom about boundaries, consequences, and the difference between family loyalty and enabling abuse. It was a space that belonged entirely to me, protected by security systems both digital and emotional. I thought about Maya sometimes, wondering if her time in jail had led to genuine change or just better strategies for avoiding consequences. I hoped for her sake that she was learning to take responsibility for her actions and build a life based on her own efforts, rather than exploitation of others. But whether Maya changed or not was no longer my responsibility. My responsibility was to myself, to the life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal, to the boundaries I'd learned to set and maintain. The keys worked perfectly in my front door, and the house that greeted me was exactly as I'd left it. My laptop contained only my own files, my credit cards were secured in my possession, and my grandmother's jewelry had been replaced with new pieces that held their own meaning and memories. I'd learned that family is supposed to be the people who protect you when you're vulnerable, not the ones who exploit your weakness for their own gain. I'd learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, and that justice isn't the same as revenge. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was strong enough to stand alone when necessary, brave enough to seek help when I needed it, and wise enough to know the difference between supporting someone and enabling their destructive behavior. Maya had taken a lot from me during those 3 weeks, but she'd also given me something valuable: the knowledge that I could survive betrayal by the people closest to me and come out stronger on the other side. 2 years later, as I locked my front door and headed out to meet friends for dinner, I felt nothing but gratitude for the life I'd built and the woman I'd become. The keys worked perfectly, the house was secure, and I was finally truly home. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.